You're not welcome here anymore. I'm Tom Mitchell, and my son-in-law Brandon said those words to me at Thanksgiving dinner, in front of his colleagues, in front of my own daughter. He told me I was embarrassing his family with my work boots and pickup truck. What Brandon didn't know was what I discovered just 3 weeks earlier. That desperate phone call I'd overheard about missing rent payments. The truth I'd uncovered about his successful practice that was actually drowning in debt. But here's the part that really stings. For 2 years, I'd unknowingly been the anonymous investor keeping his business alive. $180,000 of my money, funneled through legal channels I never questioned. When someone kicks you out of your own daughter's house while living off your money, you have 2 choices. You can leave quietly, or you can show them exactly what they just rejected. Let me paint you a picture of how Brandon Caldwell saw me. 58 years old, hands permanently stained with motor oil, driving a 2015 Chevy Silverado with 178,000 miles on it. I shop at Walmart, wear Red Wing steel-toe boots, and my idea of dressing up is a clean flannel shirt. To Brandon, I was exactly what I appeared to be. A simple mechanic who got lucky when his daughter Sarah fell for a Harvard Law graduate. The signs had been building for months. At Sarah's birthday dinner in August, Brandon actually moved my truck keys off the restaurant table, said they were cluttering the ambiance. When I offered to pay the check, he waved me off with this patronizing smile. "Don't worry, Tom, I've got this one." The second sign came during our family barbecue in September. I was telling a story about rebuilding an engine, and Brandon cut me off mid-sentence. "Sarah, honey, didn't you say your college friend was starting that investment firm?" Just completely dismissed what I was saying, like my work didn't matter enough to finish a sentence. But the moment that really got to me happened 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was at Sarah's house helping fix their dishwasher, and Brandon's law partner called. I couldn't help overhearing the conversation through the kitchen wall. "Brandon, we're 3 months behind on rent again. The anonymous investor payment didn't come through this month. We might have to start letting people go." Brandon's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't worry about it. That money always shows up. Trust me." That's when something clicked. See, I'd been making monthly transfers through my business account, Mitchell Holdings, LLC, to something called Legal Services Consulting for the past 2 years. My accountant, James Palmer, had set it up as a tax write-off for business legal advice. But I'd never actually used any legal services. After Brandon hung up, he came back to the kitchen where I was elbow-deep in dishwasher parts. "Tom, you know Sarah and I really appreciate everything you do for the family. The dinners you pay for, helping with the house repairs. It means a lot." I just nodded and kept working. But his words felt different now. Heavier. Like maybe he knew more than he was letting on. The third sign came the next week. Sarah mentioned that Brandon had been stressed about work, that his practice was struggling to compete with the bigger firms downtown. She asked if I thought they should move to a smaller apartment to save money. That night, I called James Palmer. He's been my attorney since I incorporated the business back in 1987. "James, I need you to pull the records on those legal services consulting payments, every month for 2 years. Tom, those payments go to Caldwell Law Associates. I thought you knew that." My heart stopped. "Caldwell Law? As in Brandon Caldwell?" "That's right. The payments are listed as retainer fees for business consultation. Your signature is on all the authorization forms." I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that old Formica table my wife and I bought 35 years ago. The same table where Sarah used to do her homework while I balanced the books for the garage. Brandon had been taking my money for 2 years. Not stealing it exactly, but taking it through some legal loophole while treating me like I was beneath his family's new social status. The funny thing is, if he'd just asked, I would have helped. I've always been proud of Sarah's choice in Brandon. Harvard Law, ambitious, treated my daughter well, but discovering that our family's successful lawyer was actually surviving on secret payments from the simple mechanic he was embarrassed to be related to. That changed everything. I realized I had a choice to make. Keep funding Brandon's condescending attitude toward me, or find out exactly who was dependent on whom in this family relationship. You have to understand what was at risk if I stayed silent. First, there was my daughter's respect. Sarah had always been proud of both her father and her husband, but lately I could see her getting caught between us. Every family gathering became this balancing act where she'd apologize for my rough edges while defending Brandon's career pressures. Just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, she actually pulled me aside after Sunday dinner. "Dad, maybe you could, I don't know, dress up a little more when Brandon's colleagues are around? He's trying to make partner, and first impressions matter in his field." It broke my heart. My own daughter was asking me to hide who I was so her husband wouldn't be embarrassed. But what really stung was that Sarah had no idea her husband's career was only possible because of my business success. The second stake was family unity. Brandon had been systematically pushing me to the edges of our gatherings. Last Thanksgiving, he'd assigned me to the kids' table as a joke. Easter dinner, he spent the entire meal explaining to his law school friends how blue-collar authenticity was charming in small doses. My late wife Helen had made me promise to keep our family close. She'd died 5 years ago, and Sarah was all I had left. If I let Brandon continue this pattern, I'd lose my place in my own daughter's life. But the financial stakes were even bigger than I'd initially realized. That Tuesday before Thanksgiving, James Palmer called with an update that made my blood run cold. "Tom, I've been digging deeper into those Caldwell law payments. It's not just the monthly retainer fees. There was a large loan disbursement 18 months ago. $180,000, listed as business expansion capital." "A loan? I never authorized any loan." "Actually, you did. There's a signed agreement here. The terms show monthly payments of $7,500, which explains those retainer fees. But Tom, according to this contract, if payments stop for more than 30 days, you can demand immediate full repayment." I sat down hard in my office chair. "James, does Brandon know who his anonymous investor is?" "Doubtful. All the paperwork flows through Mitchell Holdings. Unless he specifically investigated the LLC ownership, he'd have no way to trace it back to you." This meant Brandon had built his entire law practice on my money, while publicly treating me like a charity case he was embarrassed to acknowledge. But here's the thing that really got to me. Brandon wasn't just taking my money. He was actively working to exclude me from family gatherings. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, Sarah mentioned that Brandon wanted to start hosting holidays at their place instead of mine. "He thinks it would be more appropriate," she said carefully. "You know, for when his colleagues and their families join us." I'd been hosting Mitchell family Thanksgiving for 33 years. Same menu Helen and I had perfected, same traditions Sarah grew up with. And now Brandon wanted to erase all of that because I didn't fit his image of what a family patriarch should look like. The final stake became clear when Sarah called me Thursday morning, 3 hours before dinner was supposed to start. "Dad, Brandon wanted me to ask you something. Could you maybe park your truck around the back? His law partner is bringing his wife, and she's apparently very particular about aesthetics." That's when I knew. If I showed up and played along with Brandon's rules, I'd be accepting a permanent role as the embarrassing relative who gets managed and hidden. My daughter would learn that love is conditional on social status, and my grandchildren would grow up thinking their grandfather wasn't good enough for the family table. But if I confronted Brandon without proof, I'd just look like a bitter old man causing drama over nothing. Sarah would side with her husband, and I'd lose them both. The stakes were clear: my dignity, my daughter's respect, my place in my own family, and ironically, the financial security that Brandon didn't even know he was destroying. That afternoon, I made a decision. I called James Palmer. "James, I need you to prepare a complete financial summary. Every payment to Caldwell Law, the original loan agreement, current balance, and default terms. Can you bring it to Sarah's house around 6 tonight?" "Tom, are you sure about this? Once you reveal the financial relationship, there's no going back." I looked around my kitchen, at the photos of Helen and Sarah on the wall, at the Thanksgiving leftovers I'd already prepared to bring to dinner. "James, I've been going backwards for 2 years. Maybe it's time to see what forward looks like." But I had no idea just how public this revelation was going to become. The first shot was fired before I even got my coat off. I walked into Sarah and Brandon's house at 5:30, carrying my usual contribution: homemade cornbread and sweet potato casserole. Same recipes Helen and I had made for decades. Sarah hugged me at the door, but I could see the tension in her eyes. "Dad, remember what we talked about? Brandon's having a stressful week." I nodded and headed to the kitchen to set down the food. That's where I found Brandon, opening a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He was wearing a navy blue sweater that screamed, "I shop at country clubs," and his hair was perfectly styled like he was about to give a deposition. "Tom," he didn't look up from the wine. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it. Smells like Sarah's doing Helen's old turkey recipe." "Actually, I hired a caterer this year. Sarah's been so busy with her job, I thought we should do something more elevated." Elevated. The word hung in the air like cigarette smoke. "Nothing wrong with Sarah's cooking," I said calmly. Brandon finally looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never noticed before. Not just condescension, but actual irritation, like my presence was personally offensive to him. "Tom, can I ask you something? Why do you always wear those boots to dinner?" I looked down at my Red Wings, same boots I'd worn to every family gathering for 5 years. "They're comfortable, clean." "Right, but we're hosting some colleagues tonight, people from my firm. Maybe you could have made an effort?" I showered, put on my good shirt. Brandon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your good shirt is flannel, Tom." That's when I realized this wasn't about my clothes. This was about Brandon establishing dominance before his audience arrived. He needed to put me in my place while he still had the chance. "Brandon," I said, keeping my voice level, "what exactly is it you'd like me to wear?" "Something that shows respect for the occasion, for the people Sarah and I associate with now." "And what kind of people are those?" He paused, swirling his wine like he was considering his words carefully. "Educated people, professionals, people who understand that presentation matters." I felt something shift inside my chest. "And I don't understand that?" "Tom, you fix cars for a living. There's nothing wrong with that, but when I'm trying to build relationships with potential clients, I need everyone at this table to understand the level we're operating at." The level we're operating at. Like I was somehow beneath their altitude. "What level is that exactly?" Brandon set down his wine glass and turned to face me fully. "The level where a man's worth isn't measured by how much grease he can scrub off his hands." I took a slow breath. "What do you know about my business, Brandon?" "I know you've got a little garage somewhere that does decent work. Local stuff. Nothing wrong with honest labor." "Little garage." "Right. And I appreciate that it's provided for Sarah growing up. But Tom, we're at a different stage now. Sarah's married to someone who's building a significant law practice, someone who moves in professional circles." "Professional circles?" "Exactly. And when we host dinners like tonight, everyone at this table represents our family's reputation." I looked around their kitchen. Granite countertops that probably cost $15,000, stainless steel appliances that gleamed like surgical instruments. Everything expensive, everything perfect, everything designed to impress. "This is a beautiful kitchen," I said. Brandon smiled, thinking he'd made his point. "Sarah deserves nice things. She's worked hard to get where she is. She has. How are you able to afford all this? Law practice must be doing well." For just a second, Brandon's smile flickered. "We're doing fine. Building a client base takes time, but we're establishing ourselves." Establishing. That's important. Very important. Which is why tonight matters so much. When my partner arrives with his wife, when they see how we live, who we associate with, it reflects on my judgment, my potential for advancement. I nodded slowly. "And what do I reflect on your judgment?" Brandon picked up his wine again, taking a longer sip this time. "Tom, you reflect Sarah's past, her background, where she came from before she joined my family." Where she came from. Like my daughter had emigrated from some foreign country instead of growing up in a loving home with everything she needed. "Before she joined your family." "You know what I mean." "Actually, I don't. Explain it to me." Brandon's jaw tightened. "I mean before she married into a family with expectations, standards, goals that require a certain level of sophistication. And I don't meet those standards." "Tom, you're a good man. You raised a wonderful daughter. But yes, honestly, you don't fit the image we're building." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Brandon immediately straightened his sweater and checked his reflection in the toaster. "That's probably Richard and Elizabeth. Please, just try to blend in tonight, for Sarah's sake." As he walked toward the front door, I heard him mutter under his breath, "We'll talk about future arrangements later." Future arrangements. Like I was a problem that needed to be managed. I stood alone in that perfect kitchen, surrounded by appliances my money had probably helped purchase, listening to Brandon greet his colleagues with the kind of enthusiasm he'd never shown me. That's when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the kitchen window, I saw James Palmer getting out of his sedan, carrying a leather briefcase. My attorney was right on time. While Brandon was busy playing host to Richard and Elizabeth Walsh from his law firm, I noticed my phone buzzing with a text message. Documents ready. Arriving in 10 minutes. JP. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and watched Brandon work the room like a politician. He'd transformed into this polished version of himself, using words like optimal and strategic positioning while describing his legal cases. His colleagues seemed impressed, nodding along as he painted a picture of a thriving practice. The key, Brandon was saying, is building relationships with the right investors, people who understand long-term growth potential. I almost laughed. If only they knew who his real investor was. Sarah appeared beside me carrying a tray of appetizers that definitely hadn't come from our family cookbook. Dad, you're being awfully quiet. Everything okay? Just listening, learning about Brandon's business strategies. She gave me a look I couldn't quite read. He's worked really hard to build his practice. Sometimes I think people don't realize how much pressure he's under. Pressure from what? Competition. The big firms downtown are always trying to poach his clients. And the overhead costs? She trailed off, glancing toward the living room where Brandon was gesturing animatedly. Sometimes I wonder how we afford all this. That was interesting. Sarah herself wasn't completely sure about their financial situation. Has Brandon explained his business model to you? Bits and pieces. He says he has some silent partners who believe in his potential. Anonymous investors who prefer to stay in the background. Anonymous investors. My daughter was describing me without knowing it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Excuse me, sweetheart. I need to take this. I stepped onto the back patio and answered. Tom, it's James. I'm parked outside. Should I come to the front door? Give me 2 minutes. What exactly are you bringing? Everything. The original loan agreement from November 2022, monthly payment records, current balance with interest, and Tom, there's something else you should know. What? I pulled Brandon's business filing with the state. Caldwell Law Associates lists only one major creditor, Mitchell Holdings LLC. If you demand immediate repayment, his practice would have to declare bankruptcy within 30 days. I felt the weight of that information settle in my chest. Brandon's entire professional life was built on my money, and he had no idea. Tom, are you sure about this? Once these documents come out, there's no putting this back in the box. Through the patio door, I could see Brandon laughing with his colleagues, probably telling some story about his latest legal victory. Sarah was refilling drinks, playing the perfect hostess role. James, how long have you known me? 37 years since you opened the garage. Have I ever made a decision I regretted? He was quiet for a moment. The time you bought that Corvette. Besides the Corvette. No, Tom, your judgment's always been solid. Then trust my judgment now. Front door, 5 minutes. I hung up and stood there for a moment, looking at the life Brandon and Sarah had built. Beautiful house, expensive furniture, successful careers. From the outside, it looked perfect. But I'd learned something important in 37 years of running a business. The foundation always matters more than the facade. Through the window, I heard Brandon's voice rise above the conversation. The beautiful thing about having the right backing is that you can take calculated risks, make bold moves, build something significant. Bold moves. I was about to show him what a bold move actually looked like. I walked back inside and found Sarah in the kitchen checking on the turkey. Sarah, honey, I invited someone to join us tonight. Hope that's okay. She looked up, surprised. Dad, you didn't mention bringing anyone. It's just my attorney, business matter that couldn't wait. Your attorney? Dad, what kind of business do you have on Thanksgiving? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Brandon's voice carried from the living room. Are we expecting someone else? I smiled at my daughter. That would be my guest. The moment I opened the door to let James Palmer inside, I knew Brandon was calculating whether my attorney's presence was going to embarrass him in front of his colleagues. James looked exactly like what he was, a successful business lawyer in his mid-50s, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase with gold initials. Not the kind of attorney Brandon would expect a simple mechanic to retain. Tom, James nodded. Sorry to interrupt your family dinner. No problem at all. Come meet everyone. I led James into the living room where Brandon was standing with Richard and Elizabeth Walsh. The conversation had stopped completely, all eyes focused on the unexpected guest. "Everyone, this is James Palmer, my attorney. James, you know Sarah. This is my son-in-law, Brandon Caldwell, and his colleagues, Richard and Elizabeth Walsh." Brandon stepped forward with his professional smile, but I could see confusion in his eyes. "Tom's attorney. I didn't realize you needed legal representation for automotive repair." James shook Brandon's hand. "Actually, I handle Tom's business holdings, Mitchell Holdings, LLC, and its subsidiaries." "Business holdings?" Elizabeth Walsh looked genuinely curious. "What kind of business?" Before I could answer, Brandon jumped in with that patronizing tone he'd perfected. "Tom owns a garage, does good work on local cars. James probably helps with the paperwork." "Small business management," James said diplomatically, though I'd hardly call Mitchell Automotive Group a small business anymore. The room went quiet. Richard Walsh tilted his head. "Mitchell Automotive Group? I think I've seen those locations around town." Sarah was staring at me now. "Dad, what is he talking about?" That's when Brandon made his fatal mistake. Instead of staying curious, he decided to double down on his assumption that I was trying to inflate my importance in front of his educated friends. "Look, Tom, I appreciate you wanting to impress my colleagues, but let's be honest about what you do. You fix cars. There's nothing wrong with that, but calling it an automotive group is a bit much." Elizabeth Walsh laughed uncomfortably. "Brandon, maybe we should—" "No, it's fine," Brandon continued, his voice getting louder. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Some people feel the need to exaggerate their accomplishments when they're around professionals." The room was dead silent now. Sarah looked mortified. Richard Walsh was studying his wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. Brandon turned to face me directly. "Tom, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your place in this family." "My place?" "Yes, Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if you took a step back from family gatherings, especially when we're entertaining colleagues." Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "Brandon, what are you saying?" He didn't even look at her. "I'm saying that Tom's presence at events like this is becoming uncomfortable for everyone involved." "Uncomfortable for who?" I asked. "For people who matter to our future, Sarah's future. I can't keep explaining why my father-in-law shows up to dinner in work boots and flannel shirts. It reflects poorly on Sarah's background, and frankly, it's holding us back professionally." Elizabeth Walsh started to say something, but Brandon held up his hand. "Let me be clear, Tom. You raised a wonderful daughter, but Sarah has moved beyond her blue-collar upbringing. She's married into a family with standards, expectations, and professional obligations. Your inability to understand that is creating problems." "What kind of problems?" My voice was still calm, but something had shifted in the room's energy. "Image problems, reputation problems. When my colleagues meet you, they wonder about Sarah's judgment, about my judgment in choosing someone from that background." "That background?" "Working class, uneducated, the kind of people who think owning a garage makes them business owners." Richard Walsh cleared his throat. "Brandon, maybe this isn't the right time." "No, Richard, this is exactly the right time. Tom needs to understand that he's not welcome at events where Sarah's reputation is at stake." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Not welcome. Sarah finally found her voice. "Brandon, you can't just uninvite my father from Thanksgiving dinner. I'm not uninviting him from Thanksgiving. I'm uninviting him from our future, from family events where his presence damages what we're trying to build." "What we're trying to build?" "A life that matters, Sarah. A life with influential people, professional connections, social standing. Your father represents everything we've worked to move beyond." I looked around the room. Elizabeth Walsh was staring at her hands. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. Sarah had tears in her eyes. James Palmer was watching me carefully, waiting for some signal. Brandon wasn't done. "Tom, I want you to understand something. The life Sarah has now, the opportunities she enjoys, the social circles she's part of, none of that happens if she's constantly explaining why her father looks like he just crawled out from under a car." "Brandon," Sarah said sharply, "that's enough." "No, it's not enough, because every time Tom shows up to one of our events, I have to spend the entire evening managing the situation, explaining his background, apologizing for his appearance, reassuring people that Sarah isn't like that anymore." "Like what?" I asked. Common, ordinary, the kind of person who thinks manual labor is something to be proud of instead of something to escape from. Brandon turned to his colleagues. Richard, Elizabeth, you understand. When you're building a practice at our level, every detail matters. Every relationship, every impression, every association. He turned back to me. Tom, you're a liability. To Sarah's reputation, to my career, to everything we're trying to accomplish. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your dinner tonight, and then you're going to find other ways to spend holidays, other places to be when we're entertaining people who matter. People who matter, I repeated. Yes, people with education, influence, professional standing. People who can help us build something significant instead of holding us back with small-town mediocrity. That's when Sarah stood up. Brandon, stop. Just stop talking. But Brandon was too far gone to stop now. Sarah, you know I'm right. You've seen how people react when they meet your father. The questions, the assumptions about your background. We can't keep pretending this isn't a problem. The only problem, Sarah said, her voice shaking, is you. Brandon looked genuinely shocked. Sarah, I'm trying to protect your future. By humiliating my father? By telling him he's not welcome at his own daughter's Thanksgiving dinner? By being realistic about what we need to do to succeed. I looked at James Palmer and gave him the slightest nod. Brandon, I said quietly, before you say anything else, there's something you should probably see. James Palmer set his leather briefcase on the coffee table with the kind of deliberate precision that makes a room go completely silent. Even the kitchen sounds seemed to fade as he clicked open the brass latches. Brandon, I said, you've spent a lot of time tonight talking about professional relationships and financial standing. I think it's time you understood exactly what those words mean. Brandon was still standing in the middle of the room, his face flushed from his speech about my unworthiness. Tom, whatever you think you're proving, I'm not proving anything, I interrupted. James is going to show everyone some documents, business documents. I think you'll find them interesting. James pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it on the coffee table. The first page was clearly visible, a corporate letterhead reading Mitchell Holdings, LLC in elegant serif font. Richard Walsh leaned forward slightly. Mitchell Holdings? That's the company that owns the Mitchell Automotive Group locations, isn't it? That's correct, James said. 12 locations across 3 states, incorporated in 1987. Annual revenue last year was approximately $14.2 million. Elizabeth Walsh's wineglass stopped halfway to her lips. 14 million? Sarah was staring at me like I'd just revealed I was actually an alien. Dad? $14 million? James continued in his calm, professional tone. The business started as a single garage in 1987, but Mr. Mitchell has systematically expanded through strategic acquisitions. The company now employs 123 people full-time with an additional 47 part-time employees during peak seasons. Brandon's professional smile had vanished completely. Wait, Tom, you own Mitchell Automotive Group? Tom is the sole proprietor and CEO, James confirmed. Would you like to see the incorporation documents? He laid out the next page. Official state documents showing Thomas Mitchell as the registered owner of Mitchell Holdings, LLC, with subsidiary companies listed below. Mitchell Automotive Group was just one of 7 businesses under the umbrella. 7 businesses? Sarah's voice was barely audible. Mitchell Holdings also owns 3 commercial properties, a small fleet leasing company, 2 auto parts suppliers, and a 49% stake in Palmer and Associates law firm. James explained. Richard Walsh nearly choked on his wine. You own part of a law firm? James and I have been partners for 15 years, I said simply. It seemed like a smart investment. But James wasn't finished. He pulled out another document, this one with Brandon's name clearly visible at the top. This brings us to the more immediate matter, James said. Mr. Caldwell, you'll recognize this loan agreement dated November 3rd, 2022. Brandon's face went white. How did you get that? Because Mitchell Holdings, LLC is the creditor. Mr. Mitchell personally authorized the $180,000 business development loan to Caldwell Law Associates. The room was so quiet I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Elizabeth Walsh set down her wineglass with shaking hands. Sarah looked back and forth between Brandon and me. Dad, you loaned Brandon money? $180,000, James confirmed. The terms specify monthly payments of $7,500. which have been consistently met through automated transfers from Caldwell Law Associates to Mitchell Holdings. Brandon was staring at the documents like they might burst into flames. "Tom, you're the anonymous investor?" "There's nothing anonymous about it," I said. "Your signature is on every payment authorization. You've been sending thank you emails to Mitchell Holdings for 2 years, expressing gratitude for our confidence in your firm's potential." James pulled out a stack of printed emails. "Would you like me to read some of these expressions of gratitude?" "That won't be necessary," I said. Richard Walsh was looking at Brandon like he'd never seen him before. "Brandon, you never mentioned having a major investor." The investor preferred to remain private." "The investor," I said, "was sitting right here while you explained how I don't belong at your dinner table." Elizabeth Walsh found her voice. "Brandon, this man funded your law practice?" "Not just funded," James corrected. "According to our records, without the Mitchell Holdings investment, Caldwell Law Associates would have declared bankruptcy in March of 2023. The loan literally saved the business." Sarah was looking at Brandon now with an expression I'd never seen before. "You took money from my father while treating him like he was beneath us?" "Sarah, I didn't know it was him. The investment came through corporate channels. But you knew it came from somewhere," she said. "You knew someone was keeping your practice alive, and you still stood here and called my father a liability?" Brandon tried to recover. "Tom, if I'd known—" "What would you have done differently?" I asked. "Would you have treated me with respect because of my bank account? Would my work boots have been acceptable if you'd known I was worth $4.8 million? That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 2 years taking my money while publicly dismissing me as an embarrassment to your family." James pulled out one final document. "There's one more thing Mr. Caldwell should understand. According to the loan agreement terms, if monthly payments cease for more than 30 days, the creditor can demand immediate full repayment." "Immediate full repayment?" Richard Walsh looked genuinely concerned for his partner. $180,000 plus accumulated interest, which currently totals $207,438. James read from the document. "Due within 30 days of written demand." Brandon's voice came out as a whisper. "Tom, you wouldn't actually call in the loan? Why wouldn't I? You just finished explaining that I'm not welcome at family gatherings, that I'm a liability to your reputation, that I represent everything you've worked to move beyond." Sarah stood up suddenly. "Dad, how long have you been helping us?" "Helping Brandon's business for 2 years. But I've been supporting this family for 30 years, sweetheart. The difference is, I never made you feel ashamed of where that support came from." Elizabeth Walsh was studying the documents James had spread across the table. "These are legitimate corporate filings. Mr. Mitchell, your business is valued at nearly $5 million. $4.8 million as of the last quarterly assessment," James confirmed, "though that doesn't include personal investments and real estate holdings." "Real estate?" Brandon's voice cracked. "Tom owns the commercial property where 3 of his automotive locations operate," James explained, "plus his personal residence and a small portfolio of rental properties. Total net worth is approximately $6.2 million. The number hit the room like a physical force. Sarah sat down heavily. Richard Walsh was staring at his business partner like Brandon had just confessed to murder. Brandon tried one more time. "But Tom, this is all just a misunderstanding. If I'd known about your financial situation, my financial situation—" I stood up slowly. "Brandon, an hour ago you told me I was dragging down your family's reputation. You said I was a liability to Sarah's future. You told me I wasn't welcome at my own daughter's Thanksgiving dinner. I was wrong. Obviously, I was completely wrong about— You were wrong about my bank account, but you were right about who I am. I'm still the same man who shows up in work boots and flannel shirts. I still fix cars for a living. I still shop at Walmart and drive a pickup truck." I looked around the room at Brandon's colleagues, at my daughter, at the expensive furniture and perfect kitchen. "The only thing that's different now is that you know how much money I have. So tell me, Brandon, does my net worth make these Red Wing boots acceptable? Does $6.2 million make my flannel shirt sophisticated enough for your dinner parties?" Brandon couldn't answer. He was staring at the loan documents like they contained his own death sentence. "Because here's what I've learned tonight," I continued. "My daughter married a man who measures a person's worth by their bank account instead of their character. A man who was willing to take my money while treating me like I was beneath his family's dignity. James Palmer was quietly organizing the documents back into his briefcase. "Brandon," I said, "you wanted to know about my place in this family. Let me clarify that for you." I picked up the loan agreement from the coffee table and held it so everyone could see Brandon's signature at the bottom. "James, what happens if I invoke the 30-day repayment clause right now? Caldwell Law Associates would need to pay the full balance of $207,438 within 30 days, or the business would be forced into involuntary bankruptcy." Brandon's face had gone completely pale. "Tom, you can't be serious." "Why can't I be serious? According to you, I'm not welcome here anyway. According to you, I'm a liability who's holding your family back. So why would I continue funding the lifestyle of someone who considers my presence an embarrassment?" Sarah was looking back and forth between us. "Dad, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband has a choice to make, sweetheart. He can treat me with the basic respect he'd show any other human being, or he can find another way to finance his law practice." Richard Walsh cleared his throat. "Brandon, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," I said firmly. "This stops being private the moment Brandon made it public. He chose to humiliate me in front of his colleagues. He chose to tell me I'm not welcome at family gatherings. He chose to make this a public conversation about my worth as a human being." I turned to face Brandon directly. "So let's finish this conversation publicly. Brandon, do you still think I'm dragging down your family's reputation?" "Tom, I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "I misjudged your financial situation." "My financial situation, not my character, not my value as Sarah's father, not my 30 years of hard work or my contributions to this family. Just my bank account." Elizabeth Walsh was studying her hands. Richard looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "Brandon," I continued, "do you still think I'm not welcome at family gatherings?" "Of course you're welcome. This is your daughter's home." "Is it? Because 20 minutes ago you told me I was a liability to Sarah's future. You said my presence damages what you're trying to build. What's changed in the last 20 minutes?" Brandon couldn't answer. "I'll tell you what's changed. You discovered that the man you've been taking money from has more assets than you do. You discovered that the simple mechanic you were embarrassed to acknowledge actually owns a business empire worth nearly $5 million. I picked up another document from James's pile. "This is interesting. It's a summary of your business expenses for the past 2 years. Rent for your office space, salary for your paralegal, marketing costs, bar association dues, malpractice insurance." I looked up at Brandon. "Guess what percentage of these expenses were covered by Mitchell Holdings investments?" "I don't know." 87%. 87% of your professional life has been subsidized by the man you just told wasn't good enough for your dinner table. Sarah stood up abruptly. "Brandon, is that true?" "Sarah, the business needed capital investment. That's not what I asked. Did my father pay for 87% of your business expenses?" Brandon nodded miserably. "While you were telling me he was embarrassing to be seen with?" Another nod. Sarah turned to me. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because it wasn't your burden to carry, sweetheart. Brandon needed help building his practice, and I was in a position to provide that help. I was proud to support my daughter's husband." "Was proud?" I looked at Brandon, who was still staring at the loan documents. "That depends on whether your husband has learned anything from tonight's conversation." James Palmer spoke up. "Tom, I should mention that the loan agreement includes a dignity clause." "A what?" Brandon's voice cracked. "Standard in all Mitchell Holdings business loans. If the borrower engages in behavior that damages the creditor's reputation or personal dignity, the loan can be called immediately without the standard 30-day grace period." Elizabeth Walsh was looking at Brandon like she'd never seen him before. "There's a dignity clause in your loan agreement. All our business loans include that provision," James explained. "Mr. Mitchell has always believed that character matters more than collateral." I let that sink in for a moment. "Brandon, would you say that publicly humiliating your creditor at a family dinner violates a dignity clause?" "Tom, please, I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want." "I don't want your apology, Brandon. I want your answer to a simple question. Do you still believe I'm not welcome at family gatherings?" "No, absolutely not." Do you still think my presence damages Sarah's reputation? No. Do you still believe I'm a liability to your professional success? No, Tom. I was completely wrong. I handed the loan agreement to James Palmer. James, what would you recommend? Well, Mr. Caldwell has violated the dignity clause, which technically allows for immediate repayment demand. However, given the family relationships involved, I'd suggest a modified agreement. What kind of modification? Mr. Caldwell acknowledges the dignity clause violation in writing and agrees to revised loan terms that reflect the current dynamic between creditor and debtor. Brandon looked desperate. What kind of revised terms? That's up to Tom, James said, though I'd suggest monthly payments increase to $10,000 and Mr. Caldwell provides written confirmation that he understands the professional relationship between Mitchell Holdings and Caldwell Law Associates. I looked around the room. Richard and Elizabeth Walsh were watching this play out like it was a legal thriller. Sarah was still processing everything she'd learned. Brandon, I said quietly, I'm going to make this very simple. You have two choices. Option 1, I call in the full loan tomorrow, and you figure out how to find $200,000 in 30 days. What's option 2? Option 2, you write a letter to Mitchell Holdings formally acknowledging that your business exists because of our investment. You increase your monthly payments as James suggested, and you never, ever again tell me I'm not welcome at my daughter's table. Brandon didn't hesitate. Option 2, definitely option 2. I nodded to James, who made a note in his legal pad. There's one more thing, Brandon. What? Next Thanksgiving, we're hosting at my house, like we have for 33 years. The silence that followed my ultimatum lasted about 30 seconds before Richard Walsh spoke up. Brandon, I think Elizabeth and I should probably head home. Give you folks some privacy to work this out. Elizabeth was already gathering her purse. Thank you for dinner, Sarah. The turkey was lovely. As they moved toward the front door, I heard Elizabeth whisper to her husband, Did you know about any of this? Not a word, Richard whispered back. Brandon never mentioned having a major investor, let alone that it was family. After the front door closed, the four of us sat in the living room surrounded by the legal documents that had just rearranged our entire family dynamic. Sarah broke the silence first. Dad, I need to understand something. How long have I been living in a house that you're paying for? Sarah, that's not how to think about it. Then how should I think about it? Because I just discovered that my husband's entire career is funded by my father, while my husband has been treating my father like an embarrassment. Brandon finally found his voice. Sarah, I never meant for things to go this far. I wanted to build something impressive, something worthy of you. Something worthy of me? Sarah's voice was getting sharper. Brandon, do you know what's worthy of me? A husband who respects my family? A husband who doesn't measure people by their clothes or their education level? I know that now. Do you? Because 3 hours ago, you told my father he wasn't welcome at our Thanksgiving dinner. 3 hours ago, you said he was dragging down our family reputation. I watched my daughter processing everything she'd learned, and I could see Helen in her face. That same combination of disappointment and determination that Helen had shown whenever someone tried to push our family around. James Palmer was organizing his documents back into the briefcase. Tom, I'll draft the modified loan agreement and email it to Mr. Caldwell's office tomorrow. The new payment schedule will begin December 1st. $10,000 a month, Brandon said quietly. That's going to be tight. Then you'll need to work harder, I said. Build a more successful practice. Earn your way out of debt like the rest of us. Sarah turned to Brandon. I want to understand something else. When you were planning our future, talking about buying a bigger house, maybe starting a family, all of that was based on money from my father? Not all of it. My practice generates revenue. Revenue that exists because my father kept your business alive for 2 years. Brandon couldn't argue with that. Sarah looked at me. Dad, why didn't you tell me you were wealthy? Because I didn't want you to marry me for my money, I said. I wanted you to marry someone who loved you for who you are, not what your family could provide. But Brandon did marry me for what the family could provide. He just didn't know what he was getting. The truth of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Sarah, Brandon said desperately, I love you. I've always loved you. The money situation doesn't change that, doesn't it? Because you were perfectly willing to cut my father out of our lives when you thought he was just a poor mechanic? What happens the next time you decide someone in my family isn't good enough for your social circle? Brandon didn't have an answer. James Palmer finished packing his briefcase and stood up. Tom, I'll send you copies of everything tomorrow. The Dignity Clause modification should protect against future incidents. Thank you, James. I appreciate you coming out on a holiday. Any time, though I hope this is the last family business crisis we have to handle at a dinner party. After James left, Sarah walked to the kitchen and started clearing dishes with sharp, angry movements. Brandon followed her. Sarah, honey, we can work through this. We can fix this. Can we? Because I don't think this is about money, Brandon. This is about character. And I'm not sure your character is something we can fix with a legal agreement. I stayed in the living room, giving them space to talk, but I could hear everything. Sarah, I made mistakes tonight. Terrible mistakes. But I was under pressure. Pressure from who? Who was pressuring you to humiliate my father? From my colleagues? From the expectations of the legal profession? From trying to build a reputation? You built a reputation tonight, Brandon. You built a reputation as someone who bites the hand that feeds him. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Sarah loading the dishwasher with enough force to crack plates. What do you want me to do? Brandon asked. I want you to figure out who you really are. Because the man I married wouldn't have treated my father the way you treated him tonight. The man I married would have been grateful for help, not ashamed of where it came from. I am grateful. You're grateful now. Because now you know Dad could destroy your career with a phone call. But 2 hours ago, you wanted him out of our lives. Sarah slammed the dishwasher shut and turned to face her husband. Brandon, my father spent 2 years quietly supporting your dreams, while you publicly dismissed his worth. That tells me everything I need to know about both of you. As I drove my 2015 Silverado home that night, I thought about the conversation Helen and I had 35 years ago when we decided to expand the garage into something bigger. Tom, she'd said, success isn't about proving you're better than other people. It's about becoming the kind of person others can count on. I'd kept that promise. For 35 years, I'd been the kind of person my family could count on. The problem was I'd never required anyone to count on me respectfully. That was changing. The next morning, Sarah called me at 7:30. Dad, Brandon signed the new loan agreement. James Palmer emailed it an hour ago. How are you doing, sweetheart? I'm processing. It's going to take me some time to understand how I lived for 2 years without knowing the truth about our financial situation. And Brandon? Brandon's scared. His law partner called this morning wanting to know if the Mitchell Holdings investment is secure. Apparently, Richard Walsh did some research last night and realized exactly how big your business is. I wasn't surprised. What did Brandon tell him? The truth, that his father-in-law is his major investor, and that he nearly destroyed the relationship by being an arrogant idiot. That's honest. Dad, I need you to know something. What Brandon did last night was unforgivable. But what you did by supporting us quietly, without asking for credit or recognition, that means everything to me. I pulled into the parking lot of my main automotive location and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the business Helen and I had built from nothing. Sarah, I want you to remember something. Your worth as a person has nothing to do with your husband's bank account or your father's business success. You're valuable because of who you are, not what you have. I know, Dad. Make sure Brandon learns that lesson too. I will. And Dad, next Thanksgiving we're absolutely doing it at your house, just like always. After we hung up, I walked into my garage and put on my work clothes. Same Red Wing boots, same flannel shirt, same grease-stained hands that had built something significant through 35 years of honest work. But now everyone knew exactly what those hands had accomplished. If you've got a story about standing up for yourself when someone underestimated you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show people who you really are.